Lisa Martinez pulled her jacket tighter around her shaking body and looked at her two children huddled against the cold stone wall of the cave. Jake was 12 years old and trying hard to be brave for his little sister Emma, who was only 8. Both children had stopped shivering an hour ago, which scared Lisa more than anything else because she knew that meant their bodies were giving up the fight against the freezing cold that seemed to seep through every crack in the limestone, walls around them. The wind outside howled like some angry beast trying to claw its way into their small shelter, and Lisa could hear chunks of ice hitting the rocks near the cave entrance. She had never seen a storm this bad in all her 32 years of living in Colorado, and the weather reports on her phone before the battery died had called it the worst blizzard in recorded history. The temperature had dropped so fast that even the weather experts seemed confused about what was happening. 3 days ago, Lisa had packed up her old Honda with camping gear and taken Jake and Emma on what she hoped would be a fun weekend trip to help them forget about the divorce papers that had been signed just 2 weeks earlier. Money was tight now that she was on her own, and a camping trip seemed like the only vacation they could afford. The kids had been excited to sleep in tents and roast marshmallows over a campfire, and for a brief moment Lisa had felt like maybe everything would be okay, but then the storm came out of nowhere on their second night. One minute they were sitting around their small campfire telling ghost stories, and the next minute the wind was so strong it knocked over their tents and sent their camping supplies flying into the darkness. The temperature dropped 30 degrees in less than an hour, and snow began falling so hard that Lisa could not see more than a few feet in any direction. She had grabbed the kids and their sleeping bags and stumbled through the blinding snow until they found this cave. At first it seemed like good luck to find shelter so quickly, but now Lisa realized the cave was more like a tomb. They had been trapped here for almost 2 full days, and their food was gone except for half a candy bar that Emma had been saving in her pocket. Jake opened his eyes and looked at his mother, with the expression that was too old for his 12-year-old face. He had always been a serious kid, but the divorce had made him grow up even faster, and now he looked like he understood exactly how much trouble they were in. Emma was curled up next to him with her head on his shoulder, and her breathing was so shallow that Lisa had to watch carefully to make sure her chest was still moving. Up and down, the cave was about 20 feet deep and maybe 8 feet wide, with a ceiling that curved down toward the back where water dripped steadily from somewhere high above. Lisa had explored every inch of their small prison, looking for another way out, but the walls were solid rock and the only exit was the opening they had come through, which was now blocked by a wall of snow and ice that the wind kept piling higher. She tried her cell phone again, even though she knew it was pointless. The battery had died yesterday, and even when it was working, there had been no signal this deep in the mountains. The radio in their car might still work, but the Honda was buried under several feet of snow somewhere outside, and Lisa knew she would freeze to death before she could dig it out. Her ex-husband Carl would probably not even notice they were missing until Monday, when Jake and Emma were supposed to be back in school. He had been angry about the divorce settlement and barely spoke to the kids anymore, which broke Lisa's heart almost as much as losing half of everything she had worked for. The thought that he might never know what happened to his children made her feel sick to her stomach. Lisa closed her eyes and tried to think of some way to save Jake and Emma, but every idea seemed impossible. They could try to make a run for it, but the storm outside was still raging and they would not make it 50 yards before the cold and wind knocked them down. They could try to start a fire with the few dry twigs and leaves they had found in the cave, but the smoke would probably kill them faster than the cold would. The worst part was watching her children slowly slip away from her and knowing there was nothing she could do to stop it. Emma had stopped asking for food or water and just lay against Jake with her eyes closed. Jake kept trying to rub her hands and feet to keep the blood moving, but his own movements were getting slower and weaker. Lisa had always been a fighter and had worked 2 jobs to support her family, even when Carl was drinking too much and spending their money on things they could not afford. She had gone back to school at night to get her nursing degree and had never given up even when everything seemed hopeless. But this was different because fighting and working hard could not fix the fact that they were trapped in a cave during the worst storm in history with no food and no way to call for help. She looked at Jake and Emma again and felt tears freezing on her cheeks. Her beautiful children, who had done nothing wrong except trust their mother to keep them safe, were going to die because She had made a stupid decision to go camping when she should have stayed home where it was warm and safe. The guilt was almost worse than the cold because she knew this was all her fault. Outside, the wind seemed to be getting even stronger, and Lisa could hear trees cracking and falling in the forest around their cave. Whatever was causing this storm was unlike anything she had ever experienced, and she wondered if other families were trapped somewhere out there in the freezing darkness. The thought that other children might be dying made her feel even more helpless and angry at the world that could be so cruel and unfair. Jake opened his eyes again and whispered that he loved her, which made Lisa cry even harder because she knew he was trying to say goodbye. Emma stirred slightly and mumbled something about being warm, which Lisa knew was a bad sign because people who were freezing to death often felt hot right before the end came. Lisa pulled both children closer to her body and tried to share what little warmth she had left while she prayed to any god who might be listening to please save her babies, even if it meant taking her instead. She had never been very religious, but desperation made her willing to believe in anything that might help. The cave was so quiet except for the storm outside that she could hear her own heartbeat getting slower, and she knew they were running out of time. Lisa was drifting in and out of consciousness when she heard something that made her force her eyes open. It was not the wind or the sound of ice hitting rocks, but something else that seemed out of place in their frozen tomb. She listened carefully and heard it again, which was a soft whimpering sound like an animal in pain. At first, she thought her mind was playing tricks on her because people who were freezing to death sometimes heard things that were not really there. But then Jake lifted his head and whispered that he heard it too, which meant the sound was real. Emma did not move, but her breathing seemed a little stronger than it had been a few minutes earlier. The whimpering came again, and this time it was definitely coming from the entrance of the cave where the snow had been piling up for the last 2 days. Lisa forced herself to sit up even though every muscle in her body felt like it was made of ice and looked toward the opening. The storm was still raging outside, but the sound was getting closer, and now she could hear something moving through the snow. Then she saw it and could not believe her eyes because standing at the mouth of the cave was a dog. It was a golden retriever with long fur that was covered in snow and ice, and one of its front legs was hanging at a strange angle like it might be broken. The dog looked directly at Lisa with dark brown eyes that seemed almost human in their intelligence, and made that soft whimpering sound again. Lisa did not understand how any animal could have survived in the storm outside for the last 2 days, but here was this dog who had somehow found their cave there. She wondered if it belonged to other campers who might be trapped somewhere nearby, and if that meant there could be help coming. But then she remembered that no rescue teams would be able to get through the storm, and anyone else caught outside would probably be dead by now. The dog limped into the cave and shook the snow off its fur, which sent ice crystals flying everywhere. It was a beautiful animal that looked well fed and cared for, which made Lisa think it must have gotten lost recently, rather than being a wild dog that had been living in the mountains. Its collar was buried under all the fur and snow, but Lisa could see something shiny that might have been a name tag. Jake sat up straighter and reached out his hand toward the dog, which came over and sniffed his fingers before licking them with a warm tongue. The simple contact with another living creature seemed to give Jake some energy, and he even managed a small smile as he petted the animal's head. Emma opened her eyes, and when she saw the dog, her face lit up in a way that made Lisa's heart feel less heavy. The dog, which Emma immediately started calling Buddy, seemed to understand that the family was in trouble because it stayed close to the children and let them bury their hands in its thick fur to warm their fingers. Lisa was amazed that the animal was not only alive but seemed to be generating heat, like it had some internal warming system that was working better than any human body could in these conditions. But what happened next was so strange that Lisa wondered if she was hallucinating from the cold. Buddy stood up and walked toward the back of the cave, where the wall was solid rock, and began scratching at a spot that looked exactly the same as every other part of the stone surface. The dog scratched persistently and whined like it was trying to tell them something important. Jake crawled over to see what Buddy was doing and put his hand on the wall where the dog had been scratching. Suddenly, Jake jerked his hand back and called out that the rock felt warm, which seemed impossible, because everything else in the cave was freezing cold. Lisa forced herself to move over to where Jake was kneeling and touched the wall herself. He was right, and the stone under her fingers was definitely warmer than the rest of the cave wall. Not just a little warmer, but actually warm enough that it felt good against her frozen skin. She pressed both hands against the spot and felt heat flowing into her fingers and up her arms, which was the first time she had felt truly warm in 2 days. Buddy kept scratching at the wall and whining, and now Lisa could see that the dog was not just randomly clawing at the rock. It was scratching in a very specific pattern, like it was trying to trace some kind of shape or symbol that was invisible to human eyes. The dog would scratch for a few seconds, then stop and look at Lisa like it was waiting for her to understand something. Emma crawled over despite her weakness and put her small hands on the warm section of wall. The color started coming back into her cheeks almost immediately, and she whispered that it felt like a heater was hidden inside the rock. Lisa ran her hands all around the warm area and discovered that it was roughly the size and shape of a door, which made no sense because they were inside a natural cave. Buddy sat back on his haunches and barked once, which was the first loud sound the dog had made since arriving. The bark echoed through the cave and seemed to hang in the air longer than it should have. Then something incredible happened, and Lisa heard a soft clicking sound coming from inside the wall, like some kind of lock or mechanism was turning. A crack appeared in the rock right down the middle of the warm section, and Lisa could see light coming from the other side. Not sunlight, which would have been impossible this deep underground, but a soft blue glow that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. The crack widened slowly, and Lisa realized they were looking at some kind of hidden passage that had been completely invisible until Buddy showed them where to find it. Warm air began flowing out of the opening, and Lisa felt hope for the first time since the storm had trapped them in the cave. She did not understand how there could be a hidden room behind what looked like solid rock, or where the warm air was coming from, but she knew that staying in the freezing cave meant death for her children. Jake was already crawling toward the opening, and Emma was right behind him, drawn by the warmth that was calling to them like a beacon of life. Buddy limped through the crack first and then turned around to look back at Lisa like he was waiting for her to follow. His dark eyes seemed to be saying that everything would be okay if she would just trust him and walk through the impossible doorway in the rock. Lisa hesitated for just a moment because everything about this situation seemed wrong and dangerous. Dogs did not find hidden passages in cave walls, and warm air did not flow from solid rock. But then she looked at Jake and Emma, who were already halfway through the opening and heading toward whatever waited on the other side. And she knew she had no choice. She grabbed their sleeping bags and the empty backpack that contained everything they owned and crawled through the crack in the wall. The warm air felt like heaven against her frozen skin, and the blue light ahead seemed to promise safety and shelter. Behind them, the storm continued to rage, but Buddy was leading them away from the cold and death, towards something that her logical mind said could not exist. The passage was narrow at first, but quickly opened up into a tunnel that was clearly not natural because the walls were too smooth and the floor was too level. Someone or something had carved this tunnel through the solid rock of the mountain, and Lisa could not imagine how much work that would have taken, or why anyone would build something like this in such a remote location. Buddy moved confidently through the tunnel like he had been here many times before and knew exactly where he was going. His injured leg did not seem to be bothering him as much now, and Lisa wondered if the warm air was helping him heal, just like it was helping her family. The blue light grew brighter as they moved deeper into the mountain, and Lisa could hear a soft humming sound like machinery running somewhere ahead of them. The tunnel opened into a space so large that Lisa could not see the ceiling, even though the blue light was much brighter here than it had been in the passage. She stopped walking and stared in amazement at what lay before them because nothing in her experience had prepared her for what she was seeing. They were standing in what could only be described as a mansion, but unlike any building she had ever imagined. The walls curved upward in impossible arcs that seemed to defy gravity, and were made of some material that looked like polished stone but glowed with its own internal light. The floor beneath their feet felt warm and soft, like it was covered with the most expensive carpet in the world, but when Lisa looked down, she saw it was made of the same glowing material as the walls. Jake and Emma stood beside her with their mouths hanging open as they tried to take in the size and beauty of the space around them. The ceiling far above was covered with patterns of light that moved slowly like stars in the night sky, but much brighter and more colorful than any stars Lisa had ever seen. The whole place felt alive somehow, like it was breathing along with them. Buddy walked confidently across the large room toward what looked like a fireplace built into one of the curved walls. But as they got closer, Lisa could see that it was not really a fireplace because there was no wood or flames, just a warm orange glow that came from the wall itself. The heat radiating from it was gentle and steady and made Lisa feel more comfortable than she had felt in months even before the storm had trapped them. Emma ran toward the warm wall and pressed her hands against it while laughing for the first time since they had been trapped in the cave. The orange glow seemed to respond to her touch by getting brighter and warmer, which made her giggle even more. Jake was more cautious, but he also walked over to the wall and stood close enough to let the heat soak into his clothes and skin. Lisa looked around the enormous room and counted at least 6 different passages leading away into other parts of the building. Each passage was marked with symbols that glowed softly above the openings, but she could not read them because they were unlike any writing system she had ever seen. The symbols seemed to change shape slightly when she was not looking directly at them, which made her wonder if her eyes were playing tricks on her. The strangest thing about the whole place was how quiet it was despite its obvious size. Their footsteps made no sound on the soft floor, and even their voices seemed muffled like the walls absorbed sound. But underneath the silence, Lisa could hear that soft humming she had noticed in the tunnel, and now it seemed to be coming from everywhere at once, like the building itself was making the sound. Buddy sat down near the warm wall and looked at Lisa with those intelligent brown eyes that seemed to be waiting for her to understand something important. The dog's injured leg appeared to be completely healed now, which should have been impossible, but Lisa was starting to think that normal rules did not apply in this place. She knelt down and scratched behind Buddy's ears while trying to make sense of what was happening to them. Jake walked over to one of the walls and put his hand against the glowing surface. Immediately, the wall began to change color from blue to green, and then to a warm yellow that matched his mood perfectly. He jerked his hand back in surprise, but then put it against the wall again, and watched as the color shifted in response to his emotions. When he felt curious, the wall turned purple, and when he felt happy, it became bright orange. Emma discovered that when she touched different parts of the walls, they would show her pictures like a television screen, but much clearer and more vivid than any TV she had ever seen. The pictures seemed to be of places far away with strange landscapes and buildings that looked even more impossible than the mansion they were standing in. Some of the images showed creatures that might have been people, but they were taller and thinner than humans with large eyes and skin that seemed to shimmer. Lisa called her children back to her side because she was starting to feel overwhelmed by all the things that made no sense. They were obviously not on Earth anymore, or at least not in any part of Earth that followed normal physical laws. The building around them was more advanced than anything human technology could create, and the way it responded to their thoughts and emotions suggested some kind of intelligence that was watching and reacting to their presence. But despite all the strangeness, Lisa felt safer here than she had felt anywhere in a long time. The warm air and soft light made her body relax for the first time in days, and she could see that Jake and Emma were feeling the same way. Their faces had color again, and they were moving normally instead of the slow, careful movements of people who were freezing to death. Buddy stood up and walked toward one of the passages leading deeper into the building. He stopped at the entrance and looked back at them like he wanted them to follow him again. Lisa hesitated because part of her wanted to stay in the large, comfortable room where she felt safe, but another part of her was curious about what other wonders might be hidden in this impossible place. Jake was already walking toward Buddy because his 12-year-old sense of adventure was stronger than his caution. Emma followed her brother like she always did, and Lisa found herself walking after them because staying alone in the big room seemed worse than whatever they might find deeper in the building. The passage Buddy led them into was smaller than the main room, but still much larger than the tunnel they had followed to get here. The walls on both sides showed more of those moving pictures, and Lisa began to realize they were not just random images, but were telling some kind of story. She could see the same tall, thin creatures in many of the pictures, and they seemed to be building things and exploring places. Among the stars, they passed several doorways that opened into rooms, filled with objects Lisa could not identify. Some rooms contained what looked like furniture, but it was made of the same glowing material as the walls and shaped in ways that seemed designed for bodies different from human bodies. Other rooms held machines or devices that hummed softly and projected patterns of light into the air that moved and changed constantly. At the end of the passage, they entered another large room that was arranged more like a house with areas that looked like they might be for eating and sleeping and relaxing. but everything was bigger than human size and shaped differently, like it had been built for people who were taller and had longer arms and legs. In the center of the room was a table or platform that began glowing brighter when they walked near it, but Emma reached out to touch the glowing table, but before her hand made contact with the surface, something amazing happened. Food appeared on the table as if it had been created out of thin air. Not just any food, but exactly the things that Emma had been thinking about when she was hungry back in the cave. There were sandwiches and fruit and cookies and even a glass of milk that was exactly the right temperature. Jake stared at the food, and then at the table, and then back at the food again. He reached out carefully and picked up one of the sandwiches, which felt completely real and solid in his hands. When he took a bite, his face lit up with surprise because it tasted exactly like the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches his grandmother used to make for him when he was younger. Lisa was afraid to let her children eat food that had appeared out of nowhere, but they were so hungry and weak that she decided the risk was worth taking. Besides, everything else about this place seemed designed to help them rather than hurt them. She picked up a piece of fruit that looked like an apple, but tasted even better than any apple she had ever eaten. As they ate, Lisa noticed that the room around them was changing to become more comfortable and familiar. The walls were still made of the same glowing material, but now they showed pictures of Earth landscapes and blue skies instead of alien worlds. The furniture was reshaping itself to be more suitable for human bodies, and the temperature was adjusting to exactly what felt most comfortable. Buddy lay down near the table and watched them eat, with what looked like satisfaction in his brown eyes. Lisa was becoming more and more convinced that the dog was not just an ordinary animal who had gotten lost in the storm. Everything about his behavior suggested that he knew this place and understood how it worked. He had led them here deliberately and seemed to be taking care of them like it was his job. After they finished eating, Lisa felt stronger and more clear-headed than she had felt since before the divorce. The food had not only filled their stomachs but seemed to have healing properties that made her feel healthier and more energetic. Jake and Emma were laughing and playing like normal children again, instead of the frightened cold creatures they had been just an hour earlier. After they finished eating, the glowing table began to change shape and grow larger until it became a circular platform about 10 feet across. The surface remained smooth, but now it was covered with patterns of light that moved in slow spirals toward the center. Emma was the first to notice that the patterns looked like they were trying to form pictures, and she pointed excitedly at shapes that appeared and disappeared in the flowing light. Buddy walked onto the platform and sat in the exact center where all the light patterns came together. As soon as he was in position, the entire room darkened and the walls around them began to show images that were clearer and more detailed than anything they had seen before. Lisa gathered Jake and Emma close to her as they watched what could only be described as a movie playing on every surface around them. The first images showed the same tall, thin creatures they had seen in the passages, but now Lisa could see them more clearly. They had large dark eyes that seemed to hold great wisdom and kindness, and their movements were graceful and purposeful. Their skin was pale and seemed to shimmer with its own light, and they wore clothes that looked like they were made of liquid metal that flowed around their bodies. The movie showed these creatures traveling between stars and ships that were beautiful beyond description. The ships were alive in some way and could change shape and color as they moved through space. Lisa watched in amazement as the creatures visited world after world and helped other species solve problems and advance their civilizations. They were clearly more advanced than any of the species they encountered, but they used their knowledge to help rather than to conquer. One of the worlds the creatures visited was Earth, and Lisa gasped when she recognized the blue and green planet that was her home. But this was Earth from long ago, when humans were still primitive and lived in small tribes. The tall creatures studied humanity from a distance and built hidden outposts like this mansion, where they could observe and learn about human nature and potential. The movie showed centuries passing as the creatures watched human civilization grow and develop. They saw humans create art and music and literature and fall in love and care for their children and fight to protect their families. Lisa realized that these beings called themselves the Watchers, and they had been studying humanity for thousands of years to understand what made humans special among all the species in the galaxy. But then the images changed and became darker and more frightening. The movie showed a terrible enemy approaching from the far edges of space. These were creatures of shadow and hunger that consumed entire worlds and left nothing behind but empty rock floating in the darkness. The Watchers called them the Devourers, and they had been spreading across the galaxy for millions of years, destroying every civilization they encountered. The Watchers tried to fight the Devourers, but even with all their advanced technology, they were not strong enough to stop them. World after world fell to the shadow creatures, and the Watcher civilization began to crumble under the endless assault. Lisa watched with growing horror as the beautiful ships were destroyed and the wise creatures were forced to flee from their homeworlds. In their final days, the Watchers realized that they would not survive, but they refused to let their knowledge and wisdom die with them. They had been studying hundreds of worlds and species for millions of years, and they believed that some of those species might have the potential to succeed where the Watchers had failed. Of all the species they had observed, humans showed the most promise, because of one unique quality that other civilizations lacked. The movie showed Lisa exactly what that quality was, and she felt tears running down her cheeks as she understood. Humans were willing to sacrifice everything for those they loved, especially their children. The Watchers had seen human parents die protecting their young, and human communities come together to save their weakest members. They had watched humans choose love over fear and hope over despair, even when the situation seemed hopeless. This was something the Watchers had never seen in any other species, and they believed it was the key to defeating the Devourers. But humanity was still too primitive to face such a terrible enemy, so the Watchers decided to leave behind everything they could to help humans when the time came. They built secret facilities all over Earth and filled them with their most advanced technology and knowledge. But the technology would only activate for humans who proved they possessed the quality the Watchers valued most. The facilities were programmed to test humans in moments of desperate crisis, when they had to choose between saving themselves and saving others. Only those who chose to sacrifice for love would be deemed worthy of the Watcher legacy. Lisa understood now why they had been led to this place, and why Buddy had found them in the cave. The storm that had trapped them was not natural, but was part of the test. The mansion had been waiting for a family like theirs who would prove their worth, through their willingness to die for each other rather than abandon each other to save themselves. The movie continued and showed her that this was happening all over the world at the same time. Other families were facing other tests, and other hidden facilities were activating for humans who proved themselves worthy. A father and daughter trapped in a flooding basement in Bangladesh were being led to safety by what appeared to be a lost cat. A grandmother protecting orphaned children during an earthquake in Japan was being guided by a bird with unusual intelligence. Buddy turned to look at Lisa, and when their eyes met, she heard a voice speaking directly into her mind. The voice was gentle and calm and unmistakably not human. It explained that Buddy was not really a dog, but was a Watcher scout who had taken this form to blend in with Earth life. He had been waiting in the mountains for decades for the right family to face the right test at the right time. The voice told Lisa that she and her children had passed the test by choosing to stay together in the cave, even when separation might have given some of them a better chance of survival. They had proven that human love was stronger than human fear, and that made them worthy of the Watcher technology that could save not just their world, but many other worlds as well. But with this gift came a terrible responsibility, because the Devourers were coming to Earth. The shadow creatures had finally consumed enough of the galaxy that they were approaching the outer edges of the solar system. Earth had perhaps a year before the first scout ships arrived, and maybe 5 years before the full invasion fleet reached their world. The voice explained that the Watcher facilities around Earth were designed to prepare humanity for this battle, but only the humans who passed the tests would have access to the technology. Lisa and her family were now part of a small group of people who would need to learn how to use weapons and defenses that were beyond current human understanding. Jake stepped forward and asked the voice why the Watchers thought humans could succeed where they had failed. The answer came not in words, but in images that filled the room around them. The images showed human parents throughout history, fighting impossible odds to protect their children. They showed communities coming together to help strangers in need, and individuals sacrificing their lives for people they had never met. The Watchers had studied thousands of species across millions of years, and they had never seen anything like human compassion and selflessness. Most species only cared about their own survival, but humans regularly chose to help others, even when it put them at risk. This was the key to defeating the Devourers because the shadow creatures fed on fear and despair but could not consume love and hope. Emma asked if they would ever see their old life again, and the voice gently explained that their old life was ending, whether they chose to fight or not. The Devourers would destroy everything on Earth if they were not stopped. But if Lisa and her family chose to accept the Watcher legacy, they could help save not just their own world but countless other worlds that the shadow creatures planned to consume. The choice was theirs to make, but they needed to decide quickly because other families around the world were making the same choice, and the defense of Earth needed to begin immediately. The voice promised that they would be trained and prepared, and they would not face the coming battle alone, but the decision to accept this responsibility had to come from their own hearts. Lisa felt overwhelmed by everything the voice had told them, and she needed time to think about the choice they were being asked to make. The idea that alien creatures were coming to destroy Earth seemed like something from a science fiction movie rather than reality. But everything around them proved that the impossible was actually possible, and she could not deny what she had seen with her own eyes. Jake was excited by the prospect of learning to use advanced alien technology and being part of saving the world. At 12 years old, he still believed that good always defeated evil, and that heroes always found a way to win. Emma was more concerned about whether they would be safe and whether they would still be together as a family no matter what they decided to do. Buddy spoke to them again through the voice in their minds and explained that before they made their final decision, they should understand exactly what they would be facing. The platform beneath their feet began to glow brighter, and suddenly, they were no longer standing in the mansion, but were floating in space looking down at Earth from high above the atmosphere. Lisa gasped and grabbed her children as they seemed to be falling toward the planet, but Buddy's voice assured them that they were perfectly safe, and that what they were experiencing was a projection that would help them understand the coming threat. The Earth below them looked beautiful and peaceful, with blue oceans and white clouds and green continents that showed no sign of the danger approaching from the darkness of space. But as they watched, the image changed, and they could see objects moving toward Earth from the direction of the outer planets. At first, the objects looked like asteroids or comets, but as they came closer, Lisa could see that they were ships unlike anything humans had ever built. The ships were black as night and seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, making them appear like holes cut out of space itself. The Devourer fleet was enormous, with thousands of ships of different sizes, from small scouts no bigger than cars to massive vessels that were larger than entire cities. They moved in perfect formation, without any apparent communication between them, like they were all controlled by a single mind that coordinated their every action. The sight of so many enemy ships approaching Earth filled Lisa with a terror unlike anything she had ever felt before. Buddy showed them what happened when the Devourers reached a populated world, and Lisa had to cover Emma's eyes to protect her from the horrible images. The shadow creatures did not just kill the inhabitants of the worlds they conquered, but seemed to drain something essential from them, leaving behind empty husks that were neither alive nor dead. Entire civilizations disappeared as if they had never existed, and the planets they left behind were gray and lifeless. But then the scene changed, and they were back on Earth watching as the hidden Watcher facilities activated all around the world. Lisa could see pinpoints of light appearing on every continent as families like theirs were tested and proved worthy of the alien technology. Each light represented a family that had chosen love over fear and sacrifice over selfishness in their moment of greatest need. The voice explained that there were exactly 100 families who had passed the test, and each family would be responsible for defending a different region of Earth. Lisa's family had been chosen for the North American continent, which meant they would need to coordinate the defense of everything from Canada to Mexico. It seemed like an impossible task for 3 people, but Buddy assured them that they would have help. The mansion around them began to change again, and Lisa realized that the building was much larger than what they had seen so far. New passages opened in the walls and led to rooms filled with equipment and weapons that looked nothing like anything humans had ever created. Some of the devices were small enough to be held in one hand, while others were large enough to fill entire rooms, but all of them hummed with the same energy that powered the mansion itself. Jake was drawn to a room filled with what appeared to be armor, but when he touched one of the suits, it immediately began to reshape itself to fit his 12-year-old body. The armor was made of the same glowing material as the walls, but it felt as light as clothing, while providing protection that the voice said could stop weapons powerful enough to destroy mountains. Emma found a device that looked like a crystal, but when she held it, the crystal began to sing with beautiful music that made her feel calm and happy. Lisa was more interested in the communication equipment that would allow them to coordinate with the other Defender families around the world. The Watchers had built a network that connected all 100 facilities and allowed instant communication between them regardless of distance. When Lisa put on what looked like a simple headband, she could suddenly hear voices speaking dozens of different languages from every corner of the globe. She heard a man in Australia explaining that his facility had just activated after his family survived a bushfire by working together to save not just themselves, but their elderly neighbors. A woman in Norway described how her family had been chosen after they risked their lives to rescue strangers trapped in an avalanche. Every story was different, but they all shared the same theme of humans choosing to help others, even when it put themselves in danger. The voice told Lisa that she had been selected as the primary coordinator for the defense network because of the leadership qualities she had shown in keeping her family together through the divorce and their ordeal in the cave. The other 99 families would look to her for guidance and strategy during the coming battle, which was a responsibility that frightened her more than the prospect of fighting alien invaders. But as Lisa listened to the voices of parents from around the world, she began to understand that they were all feeling the same mixture of fear and determination that she felt. None of them had asked for this responsibility, but all of them were willing to accept it because the alternative was watching their children and grandchildren be destroyed by creatures that existed only to consume and destroy. Buddy explained that they would have time to train and prepare before the Devourers arrived, but that training would be intensive and would require them to learn concepts that were far beyond current human science. They would need to understand how to manipulate energy at the quantum level and how to travel faster than light, and how to coordinate battles across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The most important thing they would need to learn was how to work together as a unified force, despite being scattered across the planet and coming from completely different cultures and backgrounds. The Watchers had failed partly because they were too individualistic and could not coordinate their efforts effectively. Humanity's strength lay in their ability to form communities and work together for common goals. Emma asked if they could visit their home one more time to say goodbye to their old life, and Buddy gently explained that their house had been destroyed by the same storm that had trapped them in the cave. The unnatural weather that had brought them to the mansion had also been covering their tracks by making it appear that they had died in the blizzard. As far as the rest of the world knew, the Martinez family had vanished during the worst storm in recorded history. This news made Lisa sad, because it meant they could never go back to their normal lives even if they wanted to. But it also made their choice easier, because there was nothing left for them in the outside world. Their future lay in this mansion, and in the training that would prepare them to defend Earth against an enemy that had destroyed civilizations across the galaxy. Jake asked when they would meet the other Defender families, and Buddy explained that physical meetings would not be possible until after the initial training was complete. But they would be in constant communication through the Watcher network, and would be able to share experiences and learn from each other as they prepared for battle. The voice told them that their first lesson would begin immediately, and that they should prepare themselves for information that would change the way they understood reality itself. Lisa took Jake and Emma's hands and told them that whatever happened, they would face it together as a family. The three of them had survived the cave and found this impossible place, and she was confident that they could handle whatever came next as long as they had each other. The training began immediately, and Lisa quickly discovered that learning Watcher technology was unlike anything she had ever experienced in school or nursing training. Instead of reading books or watching demonstrations, the knowledge was transferred directly into their minds through devices that looked like simple silver bands worn around their foreheads. The information flowed into their brains so smoothly that within hours they understood concepts that should have taken years to master. Jake learned how to operate weapons that could reshape matter at the atomic level and create energy shields strong enough to protect entire cities. His young mind seemed to absorb the technical knowledge even faster than Lisa could, and soon he was manipulating the mansion systems with an intuitive understanding that amazed even Buddy. Emma discovered that she had a special talent for communicating. With the artificial intelligence that controlled the Watcher network and could process information from all 100 facilities simultaneously without becoming overwhelmed, Lisa found herself becoming the strategic mind that coordinated between the different families and helped them understand how their individual strengths could be combined into an effective defense force. The silver headband allowed her to experience what the other Defender families were going through as they trained in their own hidden facilities, and she began to understand the scope of what they were building together. In Australia, the Chen family had discovered that their facility was built into the heart of Uluru and contained weapons that could harness the planet's magnetic field as a defensive barrier. The father, Liu Chen, had been an engineer before the test, and he quickly mastered the technology that could turn the entire Australian continent into a fortress that would be nearly impossible for the Devourers to penetrate. In Norway, the Anderson family had found their facility buried beneath a glacier and filled with ships that could travel through space as easily as submarines moved through water. The mother, Astrid Anderson, had been a pilot in the Norwegian Air Force, and she was learning to command vessels that could outmaneuver anything the Devourers possessed while carrying weapons powerful enough to destroy entire fleets. Each family brought unique skills and perspectives to the growing network, and Lisa began to see how the Watchers had planned this defense for centuries. Every facility had been designed to work with the others, and every family had been chosen, not just for their capacity for love and sacrifice, but for specific abilities that would be needed in the coming battle. The most remarkable discovery was that the 100 families were not working alone, but were being supported by millions of ordinary humans who had no idea what was happening. The Watcher network was designed to amplify human emotion and determination across the entire planet, and every act of love and kindness by regular people made the Defender families stronger and more capable. When a mother in Detroit saved her neighbor's children from a house fire, the energy from her selfless act flowed through the network and increased the power available to all 100 facilities. When a teacher in Mumbai spent his own money to buy food for hungry students, the compassion he showed became part of the shield that would protect Earth from the shadow creatures. Lisa realized that the Watchers had understood something about humanity that humans themselves did not fully grasp, which was that individual acts of love and sacrifice created a kind of energy that could be harnessed and focused. The Defender families were like lightning rods that collected this energy and converted it into the power needed to operate technology that was beyond human science. But the network also allowed the Defender families to share more than just technical knowledge and strategic information. Through the silver headbands, they could experience each other's emotions and memories and fears and hopes, which created bonds between them that were stronger than friendship or even family relationships. Lisa found herself caring about families she had never met as much as she cared about her own children. She experienced the terror of the Rodriguez family in Mexico as they learned that the Devourers fed on fear and despair, and the determination of the Kim family in South Korea as they mastered weapons that could create black holes small enough to destroy enemy ships without affecting nearby planets. She felt the grief of the Okafor family in Nigeria as they mourned the loss of their normal lives, and the excitement of the Petrov family in Russia as they discovered that their facility contained technology that could manipulate time itself. The emotional connections through the network created a kind of collective consciousness among the Defender families that made them more than the sum of their individual parts. When one family faced a particularly difficult training challenge, the others could share their strength and knowledge to help overcome the obstacle. When one family discovered a new capability in their technology, the information was instantly available to all the others. Emma became especially important to this process because her ability to communicate with the artificial intelligence allowed her to serve as a bridge between the human Defenders and the Watcher technology. She could translate human emotions and intuitions into commands that the machines could understand, and she could interpret the vast amounts of data flowing through the network into information that families could use to make tactical decisions. Jake's role was more focused on the technical aspects of their weapons and defenses, but he also discovered that he had an unusual talent for understanding how the different technologies could be combined and modified. He began creating new defensive strategies that used equipment from multiple facilities working together in ways that even the Watchers had not anticipated. Lisa's position as coordinator became more challenging as the network grew stronger, and the families became more capable because she had to balance the needs and capabilities of 100 different groups while preparing for a threat that none of them fully understood. The Devourers were unlike any enemy that had ever existed, and traditional military strategies would be useless against creatures that could manipulate reality itself. But as the weeks of training passed, Lisa began to see patterns emerging in the way the shadow creatures operated, and she developed strategies that took advantage of their weaknesses. The Devourers were powerful, but they were also predictable because they had consumed so many civilizations using the same methods. They expected their enemies to respond with fear and desperation, which made them vulnerable to tactics based on hope and determination. The voice that spoke through Buddy began to fade as the artificial intelligence transferred more control to the human families, and Lisa realized that they were becoming less dependent on Watcher guidance and more capable of thinking and acting independently. This was part of the plan because the Watchers knew that rigid adherence to their strategies would not be enough to defeat an enemy that had destroyed their own civilization. Humanity's strength lay in their ability to adapt and improvise and find solutions that had never been tried before. The Watcher technology provided the tools, but the humans would have to discover new ways to use those tools if they hoped to succeed where the Watchers had failed. As their training reached an advanced level, Lisa began to receive reports from the network's monitoring systems that showed the Devourer fleet had reached the edge of the solar system and was beginning to send scout ships toward Earth. The enemy was still months away from launching a full-scale invasion, but the time for preparation was coming to an end, and soon they would face their first real test against creatures that had never known defeat. The thought of actually fighting the shadow creatures terrified Lisa, but she also felt a strange sense of excitement, because everything they had been learning and preparing for was about to become real. She looked at Jake and Emma, who had grown so much during their training, and saw that they were ready for whatever came next. They were no longer the frightened family that had nearly frozen to death in a cave, but had become something new and powerful that even the Watchers had not fully anticipated. The first Devourer scout ships entered Earth's atmosphere on a Tuesday morning, while most of the world was going about their normal daily routines, completely unaware that humanity's survival was about to be decided. Lisa felt the intrusion through the network before any of Earth's satellites or radar systems detected the alien vessels, and she immediately activated the global defense protocol that she and the other coordinator families had spent months perfecting. The scout ships were smaller than the massive vessels in the main Devourer fleet, but they were still larger than any aircraft humans had ever built, and they moved through the sky with impossible speed and agility. Lisa watched through the network's sensors as 3 ships descended toward major population centers in North America, while similar attacks began simultaneously on every continent around the globe. This was the moment that all their training had been preparing them for, and Lisa felt a mixture of terror and determination as she realized that the fate of every person on Earth now depended on 100 families who had been ordinary people just months before. But as she connected with the other coordinators through the network, she felt their shared resolve and knew that they were ready to face an enemy that had destroyed civilizations across the galaxy. Jake took his position at the weapons control system that had been installed in what used to be the mansion's main room, and Lisa marveled at how naturally her 12-year-old son operated technology that was beyond human understanding. His hands moved across the control surfaces with practiced confidence, and she could see through the network that similar scenes were playing out in facilities around the world as children who should have been worried about homework and video games prepared to defend their planet. Emma settled into the communication hub that allowed her to coordinate with the artificial intelligence network and process information from all 100 facilities simultaneously. Her 8-year-old mind had adapted to the flow of data in ways that amazed even the Watcher systems, and she had become the living bridge between human intuition and alien technology that made their defense possible. The first attack came against Los Angeles, where one of the scout ships began using some kind of energy weapon to drain the life force from everyone in the downtown area. Lisa watched in horror through the network's sensors as people collapsed, and the streets and buildings began to crumble as if they were aging decades in seconds. But before the devastation could spread beyond a few city blocks, Jake activated the Continental Defense Grid, and a barrier of pure energy surrounded the Devourer ship. The barrier was powered by the love and determination of millions of humans across North America, who had no idea they were contributing to Earth's defense but whose daily acts of kindness and sacrifice fed energy into the network. Lisa could feel their strength flowing through the system and into the weapons that Jake was using to fight back against creatures that fed on fear and despair. Similar battles were beginning on every continent as the Defender families engaged. Scout ships that were testing Earth's defenses and trying to identify weak points for the main invasion fleet. Through the network, Lisa experienced the fear and excitement of families around the world as they used weapons that could manipulate matter and energy to fight an enemy that existed partly outside normal space and time. In Australia, Liu Chen discovered that the Devourer ships were vulnerable to attacks that targeted their connection to the shadow dimension they used for faster-than-light travel. His weapons could sever that connection and trap the ships in normal space where they became much easier to destroy. In Norway, Astrid Andersen found that her ships could use the planet's magnetic field to create corridors of energy that the shadow creatures could not cross. Each victory taught the network something new about their enemy, and Lisa coordinated the sharing of information so that successful tactics could be used by other Defender families. The Devourers had expected to face primitive humans who would panic and fight each other instead of working together, but instead they found a coordinated defense that adapted and improved with each encounter. But the scout ships were just the beginning, and Lisa knew that the real test would come when the main fleet arrived with thousands of vessels and weapons that could destroy entire planets. The scouts were gathering information about Earth's defenses, and soon the Devourers would launch an attack designed to overwhelm even the most prepared resistance. Through Buddy, who had become a permanent interface between the family and the Watcher systems, Lisa learned that the main fleet would arrive in approximately 72 hours. This gave them 3 days to prepare for a battle that would determine whether humanity survived or joined the countless other species that had been consumed by the shadow creatures. The Defender families used those 3 days to make final preparations and to strengthen the emotional bonds that powered their weapons and shields. Lisa coordinated training exercises that involved all 100 families working together to create defensive strategies that had never been attempted before. They practiced combining their individual technologies into unified systems that could protect the entire planet rather than just their assigned regions. Jake and Emma worked with children from other Defender families to develop new ways of using the Watcher technology that took advantage of young minds that were more flexible and creative than adult thinking. They discovered that when multiple facilities linked their systems together, the combined power was greater than the sum of the individual parts, and that human emotions could be focused and amplified in ways that even the Watchers had not fully understood. The most important discovery was that the network could draw power not just from the Defender families, but from every human on Earth who chose love over fear and hope over despair. Lisa realized that their greatest weapon was not the advanced technology, but the simple fact that humans cared about each other and were willing to sacrifice for strangers just as much as for their own families. On the final day before the main fleet arrived, Lisa addressed all 100 families through the network and reminded them that they were fighting not just for their own survival, but for the future of humanity and for all the other species in the galaxy that the Devourers planned to consume. She told them that the Watchers had chosen humans not because they were the strongest or smartest species, but because they were the most loving, and that love would be their strength in the coming battle. When the Devourer fleet finally emerged from the shadow dimension at the edge of the solar system, Lisa felt the fear and determination of 8 billion humans flowing through the network and into the weapons and shields that would defend their world. The enemy had expected to find a primitive planet with no defenses, but instead they faced a unified Earth, protected by families who refused to let their children's future be destroyed. The massive alien vessels began their approach to Earth, moving in perfect formation and blocking out the stars with their dark hulls that seemed to absorb light itself. Lisa knew that the next few hours would determine whether humanity would survive to see another sunrise, or would become just another species consumed by creatures that existed only to devour and destroy. But as she looked at Jake operating weapons that could reshape reality, and at Emma coordinating with an intelligence network that spanned the entire planet, Lisa felt confident that they were ready for whatever came next. They were no longer the desperate family that had nearly died in a frozen cave, but had become something new and powerful that represented the best of human nature, focused into a force that could stand against the darkness that had consumed so many other worlds. The final battle for Earth was about to begin, and Lisa knew that they would face it together, not just as individual families, but as a single human species united in their determination to protect everything they loved from an enemy that had never known defeat, but had also never faced an opponent powered by the simple but infinite strength of parental love. The main Devourer fleet reached Earth just as the sun was setting over the Rocky Mountains, and Lisa watched through the network sensors as thousands of shadow ships descended through the atmosphere like a plague of darkness that blocked out the stars. Each vessel was larger than a city, and moved with the coordination of a single mind that had consumed civilizations across the galaxy for millions of years. But as the first wave of attackers reached the outer atmosphere, they encountered something that no Devourer fleet had ever faced before, which was a planet defended by beings who fought not for conquest or survival, but for love. The energy barriers that Jake and the other weapon operators had created around Earth blazed to life, powered by the collective will of 8 billion humans who refused to abandon each other to an enemy that existed only to consume and destroy. Lisa felt the strength of every parent on Earth flowing through the network as mothers and fathers around the world instinctively moved to protect their children, even though most of them had no idea what was happening in the sky above them. A teacher in Mumbai who stayed late to help struggling students was feeding power into the shields protecting India, and a firefighter in Chicago who risked his life to save strangers was strengthening the weapons defending North America. The Devourers launched their first attack using energy weapons that had destroyed the defenses of 1,000 worlds. But the beams of shadow and despair were absorbed by barriers of pure human determination that grew stronger with each assault. Jake worked with weapon operators around the globe to focus their counterattack on the largest enemy vessels, while Emma coordinated the flow of information that allowed 100 families to fight as a single unified force. For the first time in their existence, the Devourers encountered an enemy that became more powerful as the battle continued rather than weaker. Every act of courage and sacrifice by the Defender families inspired millions of ordinary humans to similar acts of love, and that love fed back into the network as energy that powered weapons capable of tearing holes in space itself. Lisa watched through the global sensors as the first Devourer ships began to fall from the sky, destroyed by weapons that turned their own shadow nature against them. The creatures that had fed on fear and despair for millions of years could not process the reality of facing an enemy that fought with hope and determination instead of terror and rage. But the Shadow Fleet was vast and the battle lasted for days, as wave after wave of enemy ships attacked Earth from every direction simultaneously. The Defender families worked without rest, coordinating attacks that required split-second timing across multiple continents, while ordinary humans around the world unknowingly fed power into the network through every act of kindness and compassion. Jake discovered that the Devourer ships were vulnerable when they tried to feed on human emotions, because the love and determination they encountered was toxic to creatures that existed in a dimension of pure hunger and emptiness. Emma learned to weaponize human joy by broadcasting the laughter of children directly into the enemy fleet, which caused some of the shadow ships to simply dissolve as if they could not exist in the presence of such pure happiness. The turning point came when Lisa realized that the Devourers were not just trying to consume Earth, but were actually trying to escape from something even worse that was pursuing them across the galaxy. The shadow creatures were refugees from a cosmic catastrophe that had destroyed their original dimension, and they consumed other worlds not out of evil but out of desperate need to find a new home. This understanding changed everything because Lisa realized that the battle could end with something other than the complete destruction of one side or the other. Through Emma's communication abilities, she reached out to the Devourer fleet and offered them what they had been searching for across the galaxy, which was a chance to exist without consuming others. The Watcher technology could create a pocket dimension where the shadow creatures could live without needing to devour other species, and Lisa proposed an alliance that would benefit both humanity and the Devourers. In exchange for ending their attacks on Earth and other inhabited worlds, the shadow creatures would help defend the galaxy against whatever cosmic force had originally driven them from their home dimension. Jake and the other weapon operators maintained their defensive positions while Lisa negotiated through Emma, with the intelligence that controlled the Devourer fleet. The shadow creatures were ancient beyond human understanding, and had forgotten what it was like to have choices other than consume or die. But Lisa's offer reminded them of what they had been before hunger and desperation had turned them into destroyers. The negotiation lasted for hours while the battle raged around Earth, and Lisa felt the strain of trying to communicate with minds that existed partially outside normal space and time. But finally, the attack stopped, and the shadow ships withdrew to a position beyond the moon where they waited for the humans to prove that their offer was genuine, rather than a trick to buy time. Using technology that combined Watcher science with human intuition, the Defender families created a stable pocket dimension that existed parallel to normal space, but was isolated from the physical universe. The shadow creatures could live there, without needing to consume other species, and could even help defend the galaxy by monitoring threats from the void between dimensions. The moment when the first Devourer ship entered the pocket dimension was the most beautiful thing Lisa had ever experienced, because she felt through the network the joy and relief of creatures that had been trapped in endless hunger for millions of years. The shadow beings remembered what it was like to exist without consuming others, and they wept tears of pure energy that fell like rain on their new home. With the immediate threat ended the artificial intelligence that controlled the Watcher network, offered Lisa's family and the other Defender families a choice that would determine the future of human civilization. They could return to normal lives and let the world forget that the invasion had ever happened, or they could accept the role of Earth's permanent guardians and join a galactic community of species that protected each other from cosmic threats. Lisa looked at Jake, who had become a master of technology that could reshape reality, and at Emma, who could communicate with intelligences from across the galaxy, and she knew that their old life was gone forever. But she also knew that they had found something more important than the normal existence they had lost, which was a purpose that connected them to the infinite cosmos around them. The mansion that had saved them from freezing in a cave had become the headquarters for Earth's entry into galactic civilization, and other worlds that needed protection were already sending requests for help from the humans who had succeeded, where even the ancient Watchers had failed. Lisa realized that their greatest victory was not defeating the Devourers, but proving that love and sacrifice could solve problems that violence and technology could not. Buddy revealed his true form for the first time as a being of pure energy that had guided them from the beginning and would continue to guide them as they learned to protect other worlds that faced threats they could not handle alone. The dog that had led them out of the cave had become their permanent companion and teacher as they prepared to travel to the stars where other species needed the same protection that had saved Earth. Jake asked if they would ever see Earth again, and Buddy assured him that their home world would always be part of their mission, because protecting humanity meant protecting all the worlds that humans would eventually settle among the stars. Emma wanted to know if they would still be a family, and Lisa hugged her children and promised that they would face whatever came next together, just as they had faced the storm and the cave and the impossible mansion that had changed their lives forever. As they prepared for their first mission to a distant world that was threatened by creatures from the void between galaxies, Lisa thought about the camping trip that had started everything, and realized that she had gotten exactly what she had hoped for, which was a chance to help her children forget their old troubles and start a new life together. They were no longer the broken family that had been torn apart by divorce, but had become the founding members of humanity's greatest adventure among the infinite stars.